Futurama comic, issue 76. The Planet Express flies towards another planet that's making their hair frizzly. Somehow the writer found a way to make even Bender complain about this, because he happened to bring his celebrity hair collection on the mission for no reason. Leela shakes an alien's hand and says they bring good tidings from Earth as well as hair gel. When the alien asks if they really are from Earth, Bender was pretty smart when he said, "That depends. Are you going to kill us if we say yes?" Considering how dangerous their missions are, that's a real concern. They love Earthlings because Zap Brannigan saved their planet from an invasion. Leela intentionally does a spit take on Fry, which is something Bender would do for fun, not her. There isn't as much of a point to Leela if she's just being like Fry or Bender. She sees a statue of Zap and says it's inaccurate because it doesn't show his gut. She also wonders where his smirk is, but he does have a smirk. She's offended that the statue is attractive and wants to go back to Earth. Fry wonders if Zap really did what he did, and Leela decides to go talk to Kith, who says to Amy that any night he spends with her is the greatest, and he looks forward to every moment with her day or night. Bender talks to them from the ship, and Kith says he's surprised it took so long for someone to learn about Zap's past. A lot of people would know about his past. He's right to be surprised, because with all the different planets the crew went to, they should have found something like this earlier. The fact that they didn't implied in the show that Zap was always a failure. He was the fastest, strongest, and kindest. When some soldiers were telling Kith that he wasn't going to last in this platoon, that he joined for some reason, Zap stood up for him. How is Zap able to lift a tank anyways? Kith was honored to meet him and got told that if he stayed with him, he'd always be looked after. Zap made sure that Kith was in his battalion, and they were soon fighting side by side all over the galaxy, keeping Earth safe. It's sad that this isn't the case now. I don't know why they thought it'd be funny to have it not be the case. Occasionally it is, but not all the time. Because of all the attention Zap was getting, Nixon naturally added the idea that if he cloned a whole bunch of Zaps, like he did in the bad future of issue 67, they'd have the best military in the universe. So he turned to Mom for an evil takeover of the universe, and Wernstrom got the job because he had a cloning machine and not Farnsworth back then. Which is weird because I always imagined that Farnsworth was better at science than Wernstrom, so I would think he would have made the machine first. Zap gets told that they want to make thousands of clones of him for universal harmony. He buys it, but sadly, Farnsworth decides to make sure that the clones will come out of the oven half-baked to make Wernstrom look bad. Well, that's reprehensible considering that it's going to inconvenience a lot more people than just Wernstrom. And I'd expect Farnsworth to have made a cloning machine long before Wernstrom. A few minutes later, Wernstrom says Zap's DNA is forming triple and quadruple helixes that are spiraling out of control. The DNA is mutated and is ruining the original Zap. So Zap asks Mom for a hug and calls her pretty, which offends her because she hates hugs. You'd think Farnsworth could turn him back to normal. Instead, he refused to put in the effort, and I have to assume it's because he's too selfish to care. I really didn't need Farnsworth to be responsible for everything bad Zap did as a captain. He has enough to answer for. We always assumed Zap was always evil. Nixon admits they made a mistake here at least. And Zap reveals that he's got a big appetite now, and gets asked if he's feeling okay. Why didn't they go to the other scientist working for Mom to see if he could fix this? The next day, Zap didn't want to tell Kith about his secret mission, which implies that he didn't just do things that were worth bragging about on the mission. And he reminded Kith that he was his commanding officer. At least he didn't outright say they weren't friends anymore. So he told him to help him set up a dating account for him. And over the next few weeks, rather than studying the plans for their defense of aliens, Zap only wanted to know which women from his dating account looked the easiest. Kith told Zap they were under attack and pinned down by the enemy's lasers, and Zap said they just needed a shield to make their escape, and used Kip as a human shield. So the woman from Kip's species realized that Zap is subpar now. Realistically, it would have been fired, but we can't have that because Futurama is a comedy. Nixon deluded himself into thinking that it could put Zap back on track by making him be a part of a team of the Earth's mightiest heroes. Since when are there superheroes on Earth in Futurama without them needing miracle cream? He should have said they were from other planets. If they were from Earth, why didn't they meet the Futurama crew when they went superhero? It'd be more believable if all of them were robots specifically built to put Zap back on track. Zap flirted with the female one, and he was told they needed him as a leader, but he's clearly too easily distracted for the job. They needed him to help defend the world from a robot, and Zap goes to Nixon later and says that he was the only one smart enough to run away from the fight. That is smart, to be fair. But figuring out a successful strategy for defeating the bad guy would have been smarter, of course. He didn't care about the fact that none of his teammates had survived. And Nixon gets told that Zap is picking fights across the universe without being provoked. Almost all of their soldiers are gone, and Nixon wonders who could fight back and save the Earth. And Mom says there's only one way to provide the military with the bodies it needs. Robots, obviously. In fact, there's absolutely no excuse for not having all of the soldiers replaced with robots in a world where they can mass-produce robots that are just as smart as humans, creating another one every second in a factory. Why waste human lives instead? I don't even know why Zap and Kip still have their jobs when the jobs are better suited to robots. That'd be humane, so it'd be better PR. Robots would be harder to damage and have a metal skin that hurts more when it hits someone. So they'd be better soldiers, who could be repaired a lot more easily, from anything. Mom says she got in here because the White House used to be just one of her hundreds of rental properties. That didn't make any sense. I guess she means this version of the White House, not the one we know. How could she rent the property the White House was on? She should have been here because she was invited. It cuts ahead in time to the Mom Corp lab. Farnsworth told them to send Zap's clones to clean up his mess, and assuming they all perish, they'll eliminate any evidence of their failed experiment in the process. You know, other than the fact that people would remember that they were made. At that point, why didn't they kill Farnsworth and Wernstrom? Or better yet, erase their memories of making the clones. Somehow Nixon thinks this is despicable, when this isn't functionally any different from sending any other soldiers to their deaths just because they're clones. Of course he agrees anyways. Zap said it was a shame to have to send the clones to their demise, so does he think it's a shame or not? And a few days later, Nixon said he was going to award Zap a Medal of Honor for his heroics defending their planet. He was confused about Zap wearing a skirt, and Zap said this was the new dupe uniform that he designed, because he loves the feel of Feller. He got told to go find the medal in Mom's lab and stand in a specific place. Logically, this would be the point where he'd be returned to normal, because Farnsworth can make anything. It's not even a matter of whether he'd care. His bosses would force him to do this. Wouldn't they easily be able to find his old DNA, like from a hair in his house? So they could make a clone of him that was like the old Zap, and either kill the original Zap, or ideally just send his data to the clone. So they could have returned him to normal in a roundabout way. Instead, Zap screams and gets frozen in carbonite. Nixon says this is the only way to truly get rid of every bit of evidence of the cloning program, somehow forgetting to erase Farnsworth and Wernstrom's memories. There was a volunteer who was going to jettison him into space to drift forever, but wouldn't they just throw him into a star? Or better yet, a trash compactor? Instead of making him drift in space when they know that aliens exist and people can go all over the galaxy? So they should have known there was a chance that he'd be found and rescued. Kip was the one who dropped Zap off in space, but aliens found him months later, with a note telling them to return him to Kip on Earth. Why would they do that just because he used to be Zap's friend, when it's so obvious that he's not who he used to be anymore? And Kip is too stupid to just tell Farnsworth to turn him back to normal, or at least send his data to a different body. His data could be sent to a robot that could be reprogrammed so that he could be like his old self, which would be fine because it'd be turning him back to normal. Zap was told what happens to him and wanted revenge. But he didn't kill Nixon. He told Kif that since he left him in space, he's gonna friend the hell out of him until the end of his days. But once he realized that Kif was the only reason he had that note and survived, he still owes him. At least this helps explain why he hates Kif, as one of the movies shows. But we always assumed he hated him because Kif isn't manly, and that was good enough of an explanation. Zap blackmailed Nixon by threatening to reveal the failed cloning mission. Even though Wernstrom also knows about the failed cloning mission, no one's thinking about him, so why did Nixon even try to go after Zap? How is that supposed to work when there's always going to be a chance that someone won't believe Zap because he has no evidence? So he was named Captain for Life because he threatened to tell people a truth that would seem far-fetched. But people would believe him because he's respected? Also, the future would have the internet and the news on all sorts of planets. So I assumed that everyone knew about the clone army, because it'd get out in seconds that Zap Brannigan was seen in multiple different places at the same time. We already live in a world where a celebrity can't go anywhere without it being talked about on Twitter. Multiply that by 1,000 for its clones. That's not a good enough explanation for Zap being Captain for Life. Him threatening to tell people something that'd already be common knowledge. Nixon would know that he wouldn't ever be fired, after all the things that he did. Kif knew about the clones, so you'd think if Nixon wanted to remove every shred of evidence of the clone project, Kif would have been killed before Zap, or at least had his memory of the clone project erased. In fact, since this is the future, couldn't they just have Zap's memory of that erased? Wouldn't he assume Farnsworth would be able to erase memories because he can do anything? We always assumed he was Captain for Life on the Nimbus because he was still riding on all of the accomplishments he made that Dupe was actually proud of, that we don't know about. Him having his job still because of course he used to be good at it and his bosses were desperately hoping that he would go back to those days of competence was always good enough of an explanation for us. But apparently he was willing to freeze him regardless. He froze him before, you'd think he'd just arrange for that to happen again. He threatened him, after all. You'd think arranging Zap's assassination would be child's play for him, considering how easy it was for him to get frozen in the first place. And he wasn't even suspicious that he had to go to a lab to get it. Why would he go from wanting to freeze him to agreeing to make a decision he hates to humor him? This is so dumb. I hope this isn't canon to the show. Amy says it's sweet that Kif used to be his friend, and Kif says that the reason he's been putting up with his abuse all this time is that he thinks he's not bad deep down. Even though obviously he is now, and he knew that as soon as he changed. And he wanted to leave him to his death in an earlier issue, so he would have quit by now then. Leela thanks him for being honest and pushes her friends out of the house, letting them get back to their date night. You'd think these guys would be able to tell Nixon on him and get Zap fired, but that'd just get Kif in trouble for blabbing. Fry and his friends being thankful that the clones were all wiped out in battle immediately gives away the twist that there's tons of awful defective Zap clones being fed by MomCorp. Why are they being kept alive if she's just keeping them trapped down there doing nothing? Boy, the story had problems. It would take several paragraphs to explain all the ways this doesn't make any sense. So Kif says Zap used to be a great soldier, but there was a project to make 1,000 of him, and because it was given to Wernstrom, because apparently only he had a cloning machine, Farnsworth crossed the moral event horizon and sabotaged his project so that Zap would become the horrible captain he is today. It could have easily been written that Wernstrom screwed up because he was so incompetent. It doesn't even make sense that Zap himself was sabotaged. It always went without saying that Zap would have just been returned to normal. I assume nobody knew that Farnsworth was an expert at cloning, so they didn't think to tell him to make a clone. But they could just send his data to a robot and reprogram him. It just creates a continuity error, because there's no justification for him ever being this way then. And Nixon and that woman knew he became a bad captain. But instead of firing him right away, after they trick him into getting frozen in carbonite, they arbitrarily don't keep the carbonite there, so because of Kif, he's taken out of the carbonite at some point. And for some reason he had the guts to demand Nixon a job as captain for life, even though we know that he was terrible at his job. Because I guess he just wants to pay that badly. And because he threatened to tell everyone about the clones, he somehow got that job. Even though Nixon was willing to freeze him in carbonite to hide the clone project. So he would have just done it again. Had him secretly assassinated in another way. And that was over a secret that everyone would know about anyways, because it'd take 2 seconds for the various people on other planets to report to Twitter that Zap's clones are in the places they're in fighting wars. The bottom line is, well, I see how they wanted to give him a backstory. They screwed it up. They could have easily just had him turn out to be a bad captain because he got corrupted by power eventually. Because Leela did in his position. Farnsworth never even gets called out on it.